All right, it's now 8:05. We'll go ahead and get started. I am Andrew Jimenez. I am a software engineer here at Patch My PC, and joining me is Kyle.
Yep, I'm Kyle Namwich. I'm a customer engineer with Patch My PC.
Awesome. And today we're going to talk about managing applications and updates in Config Manager and Intune. This is going to be a not super duper deep dive. This is going to be a very good starting point. A lot of this stuff carries over, and I think we're going to end up making a more advanced webinar in the future. First, some general notes. This is a Teams live event. You can ask questions in the Q&A section. It is live. You can scrub back and forth in the video, and you can click the live button to go back to the current time. There is a Q&A section up at the top of Teams. You'll click on the Q&A button and then feel free to ask your question. We have lots of moderators today, so feel free to ask questions, and our moderators should be able to answer them. They'll also be bubbling up questions to the presenters, Kyle and I, during the presentation, so that we can answer some live. Moderators will review your questions. They can reply privately, or they can make it public if we really want to show that the reply to everyone. We can do that there. Excellent. We'll go over today's agenda. So we're going to talk about Config Manager first. First, I'm going to go over software updates, then applications, and we'll go over deployments within those. And then I'll hand it over to Kyle, and he'll go over Microsoft Intune, including like the different types of applications in Intune, managing assignments within Intune, and then Patch My PC, apps versus updates. And then we'll talk about deployment, not best practices, but strategies. Including some deployment scenarios, and we'll talk about everyone's favorite thing in the world, reboots. And then we'll open up for Q&A, which I imagine we'll have quite a few questions. So we tried to leave quite a bit of time for Q&A today. I'm going to start with Microsoft Configuration Manager, or whatever it's going to be called next year. Deployments in Configuration Manager. So apps, updates, and packages in Config Manager share the same or a very, very similar deployment workflow. You've probably seen the wizard before, and that wizard covers the following: who, what, when, and how. Who, what, when, where, and how things should be deployed. I thought this was very interesting as I was going through it, and I realized that it basically covered everything but why. And I guess you get to decide why you're making a deployment. But who should receive this deployment? What should be deployed? Where should content be stored? When should that deployment occur? And how should that thing be deployed? And the options you get there are available or required install or required uninstall. And then of course, there's a bunch of other options of how the deployment should happen. I'm actually going to go through this deployment wizard demo. I'm sure a lot of people have seen it before, but I plan to go over every single button in here. So we're going to go ahead and right click. We have an application that's pre-created here, and we're going to right click and we're going to hit deploy on it. And I'll give this a second to load. I want to make sure everyone's slides catch up. And so when you start the deployment wizard, you'll see, because I deployed off the application, it already filled out what is being deployed. So software. You can also do this the other way. You could go to a collection and deploy it, and you can choose, and you can start this deployment wizard based on who is getting the deployment. But since I right clicked on the application itself, it filled out that application for me, and then you choose who gets that software. So we choose a collection. If you've ever used that, if you've ever chosen the collection, you'll see here that it defaults to user collections. You can also choose device collections and choose exactly where you want that deployment to go. I'm going to go ahead and I just have a patching one here. I'll hit OK. So this is for an application. I will say again, the application updates or even like a package deployment, they all use the same wizard. You'll see this checkbox here, automatically distribute content for dependencies. If this application had any dependencies, it would also be able to distribute the content for that application's dependencies as well. We'll hit next here. Next is content. So most people just click past this. What this page actually shows you though is where this application is distributed, which distribution points have the content for this application. Now, if this application was not already distributed, you would need to actually fill in and grab an item and add a distribution point down below, and the wizard would actually deploy the software to that distribution point for you. But since we've already distributed it, it shows you here, this application is distributed to one distribution point and one distribution point group. Next page, deployment settings. So this is where you choose how you want the application deployed. You'll see here the action, you get install or uninstall. You also, for install, you also have the ability to choose available. This will show it in the application in company portal, or required. Oops. And required will actually deploy it and force the installation for you. You get a bunch of options down here depending on what you choose above, allowing users to attempt to repair this application. That will show it in company portal, and they can click a repair button. When a resource is no longer a member of the collection, uninstall this application. This is a newer option. This is an implicit uninstall. So if you're controlling whether devices have a piece of software based on the collection they're in, you can actually have the application install when a device enters a collection and uninstall when a device or user leaves that collection. Pre-deployed software to user's primary device, I believe that's only with user deployments, and it will deploy software to the user's primary device. Send wake up packets will actually wake up the devices. I don't know many people that actually use this too often with the install deployments, but it's pretty cool. And if you set up, you can actually set it up and have other devices that are nearby wake up your devices when they get the deployment. And then this one, allow clients on a metered internet connection to download content after the installation deadline. So this means after the deadline hits, if the user is on, say, a cellular connection, you can check that box and they'll still install the software. By default, they won't install the software if they're on that metered connection, to save the client some money, actually. I'm going to go with install required for this piece, and then we go to scheduling. So scheduling lets you choose when the deployment becomes available to the device and when to actually perform the install. So you have two options here. You have the available time and you have the deadline time. If you choose an available time, you can choose that in the future. And the available time is when the device gets the policy and is able to actually start processing the policy. The deadline time is when the installation actually occurs. So this one, you can make it as soon as possible, or you can even schedule it at a later time. If you do schedule it at a later time, what will happen between these two times is if it's a required deployment, the software can actually download in the background. And then when the deadline hits, it can start installing directly at that deadline. You may also, I think it's pretty common for most people to choose client local time here instead of UTC. And then it's a bit more reliable on when the application will be installed, because it'll be on the time for the client itself. This next checkbox here, I want to go over it real quick. Delay enforcement of this deployment according to user preferences up to the grace period defined in client settings. So what this one does is if your users use, and I need to go back to the client real quick, in their software center, if they've defined the time where they are working, this actually makes this checkbox do something. These checkboxes do something. So if your users set their business hours, this checkbox says, go ahead and allow those business hours to be used to delay deployments. Next, all right, so this is a bit more on how. So this is what the user sees on the endpoint. So you've got user notifications up first, display in Software Center and show all notifications. What this option will do is it will actually show, hey, there's a new update available. Hey, this update's installing. Hey, this update installed successfully. Hey, this update needs a reboot. That one's the most verbose. The next one, a little less verbose, display in Software Center and only show notifications for restarts. This one will basically install the application or update silently. And then if there's a reboot needed, basically if the update passes a 3010, it will give the user a pop-up that says, hey, this update needed a reboot. Can you reboot now? And then there's hide in Software Center and all notifications. This one will be completely silent and will not show anything to the end user. You won't see it in Software Center. You won't see anything at all. It'll just install and be done.
Next, when the installation deadline is reached, allow the following activity to be performed outside the maintenance window. So maintenance windows also come into this. You can set a maintenance window on collections. Maintenance windows are when you allow installations to occur. So you set time blocks basically that allow installations to occur. These options will allow you to adjust what happens if the deadline hits and you're not in a maintenance window. So if the deadline hits and you're not in a maintenance window, you can allow the software installation and you can allow system restart. Most people won't choose the system restart outside of a maintenance window because the point of maintenance windows is that you are defining a time where you think reboots are allowed. And I don't think I've ever messed with a Windows embedded device. I'm not sure how many people have, but this last option is only for Windows embedded devices. I don't even know what it does. Next is alerts. Most people don't touch these. I've literally never used alerts, but you can use these. If you're using SCOM, you can interact with SCOM, or you can have Config Manager pop up alerts for you based on a variety of different things. And that's it. That's a successful deployment there. I'll hit next, and this application will be deployed to that collection. Excellent. And we'll go back to the slides now. Let's see if the slides start back up for me. Cool. Awesome. So that was the deploy wizard. We're going to go ahead and talk about software updates now. So software update. A software update is an update in Config Manager, which is honestly just in WSUS. Config Manager copies what it gets for updates from WSUS. It contains information on when a package is applicable and installed. So updates, as opposed to say applications, have rules for determining if an update should be installed and whether an update is installed already. Next, a software update group is literally just a group of updates. A software update group can be deployed, but besides it being able to be deployed, it's literally just a group of updates. Nothing really special about them besides that. Next, you have deployment packages. This is where the content of software updates is stored. The deployment package is what is synced up to your distribution points for your endpoints to actually get that content. A software update point sync, it is the synchronization of software updates between WSUS and Config Manager. Again, Config Manager kind of just puts its fingers in WSUS and takes all of the data in WSUS and brings it into itself. So when that happens, that's called a software update point sync. And then finally, an ADR, that is an automatic deployment tool or rule. That is a scheduled search and deployment mechanism for software updates. It generates a SUG and downloads updates to a deployment package and also deploys those updates. All right, ADRs. So ADRs they automate the selection, download, and deployment of software updates. Again, if your current workflow kind of looks like this, where you search for updates and all software updates, select a bunch of them, and deploy them out, ADRs automate that for you. You basically choose which updates you want to deploy using a bunch of filters. You can choose to create a new software update group on every ADR run, or you can add to an existing software update group. And you can utilize multiple deployment rings with ADRs. I've seen a lot of setups where people set up multiple ADRs and they all do the same thing, except each one has its own deployment. When it's much more efficient, you can just have one ADR and have multiple deployments within it. Patch My PC updates and ADRs. So Patch My PC updates in Config Manager can utilize ADRs as well. That's the easiest way to use them. There are some things to note here with Patch My PC updates. Patch My PC syncs on its own schedule outside of the software update point sync and outside of the ADR schedules. So if you want a Patch My PC update to actually go out in an ADR, the Patch My PC sync has to run and complete. The software update point sync must run and complete, and then the ADR has to run. I actually had a call yesterday where this group was saying, hey, the software updates, Patch My PC created them, but they're not being deployed by the ADR. And what's happening was their software update point sync wasn't completing. And so they weren't getting updates deployed out because the the sync between WSUS and config manager wasn't happening. So all three things have to happen for the updates to actually be deployed. Now, the really cool thing is PatchMyPC, the PatchMyPC publisher, can trigger a software update point sync. A software update point sync can trigger an ADR. So just based on that, you can have everything completely automated. Every time PatchMyPC runs a sync, you can have it push it updates via an ADR. Now, I wouldn't exactly recommend that, but that is something that is very possible. Next, let's talk about config manager apps a little bit. So you have packages and programs. These are the legacy way of doing things. So config manager package is the old way of deploying applications. They do not have a detection method. They basically have a pass fail on whether or not, based on the return codes from the programs that run them. Which again, the config manager programs is part of the config manager package, and it is the scripture executable that is run within the package. Next is config manager apps. Config manager apps are the new way of doing things. Not really new anymore. They've been around for quite some time, but they are similar to a package, but they're a bit smarter. They have, you can assign a detection rule to config manager apps to determine whether or not that app has been installed. Config manager apps have deployment types. You can assign multiple deployment types to a config manager app, and each deployment type can define different settings for each application. PatchMyPC apps in config manager. So applications in config manager that PatchMyPC creates, we have a few options here that I'd like to go over, and I'll show this in a demo shortly. You can choose for PatchMyPC apps by default, we'll actually update the apps in place. So what that means is PatchMyPC will create an application. It will, anytime there's a new version of the application, it will update that application in place. So basically we just update the deployment type. This allows easy management of task sequences because your task sequence points to the application object. And if PatchMyPC never changes the application object, you'll always have the latest. You can also choose to create a new application. This gives you more fine-grained controlled deployments, and but with the downside of your task sequences and stuff have to be manually updated. We also allow you to retain old versions of apps. I totally recommend turning that on. It's super helpful if you have to do a rollback. Cool. I'm going to show off ADRs now, and then I'll go into config manager apps as well. Awesome. So this is my config manager environment. I already synced some updates in here. So I've got some PatchMyPC updates. I've got some PatchMyPC updates in here already, and I've got automatic deployment rules. I've got one set up already, but I'm going to create a new one. I'm actually going to delete this one just to minimize confusion. So this is where your software updates will end up after PatchMyPC syncs them and a WSUS sync has happened, or a software update point sync. And if we go into automatic deployment rules, we'll hit create automatic deployment rule. And I actually see a question that I want to answer here. If we use a pilot group, is it recommended to have 1 or 2 ADRs? If you have a pilot group, I'm going to actually show it right now. I would recommend just 1 ADR. You can have one ADR and it will deploy to the pilot group and then production group. So let's do that now. I'll go PatchMyPC ADR. So I'm going to do an ADR, just a basic PatchMyPC ADR. The first thing you do, give it a name. Next, collection. So this is the first collection that you want this ADR to deploy to. So I'm going to hit browse, and I'm going to choose my pilot group here. I'm going to have this ADR run every week. So we're going to do weekly patching of our third-party updates. One important thing to note here is the first thing you'll choose when creating an ADR is whether to add to an existing software update group or create a new software update group. The decision you make here is important based on how long your deployment is going to last. So for example, if your deployment is happening weekly, but your deadline for your longest deadline is 2 weeks out, you'll want to create a new software update group. You want to do this because if you add to an existing software update group, anytime the ADR runs, it will basically recreate the deployment. So if your deployment happens, if your deadline for your longest deployment happens after, or for a longer period than the ADR sync, you won't end up ever hitting the deadline for your updates. I'm going to make our longest group happen within 6 days. So, and our ADR sync will happen every 7 days. So that'll give us plenty of time to actually for the deadline to hit and the installs to happen. So for this one, I'll add to an existing software update group. Next, type of deployment required. You can actually do available assignments for updates now. This is really cool for testing situations. Typically though, updates are going to be required because you want them to install. And we'll go next. So this is where you choose which updates you want to be deployed. You have a ton of options here. If your current workflow for updates is every month I go into all software updates and I have a search that I've saved, and I just use that search every time, and then I select the updates and create a SUG based on that. The ADR can simplify that for you. It can do the exact same thing. What you can do is you can model the search that you do with these filters, and the ADR will do everything that you're doing manually for you automatically. For this use case, I'm going to do vendor is PatchMy PC because we're doing PatchMy PC updates. And then the other thing I'm going to add is superseded and choose no. Now I choose no for superseded because PatchMy PC, whenever a new version of an update comes out from PatchMy PC, it will supersede the previous version. So if you choose PatchMy PC and superseded no, you'll get the latest version of every app. Now, this preview button is also super duper helpful. It lets you know if you've done it right. So it'll basically run that search right now, and it'll say, these are the updates that would go out if you ran this ADR right now. Now, say I'm a little bit weary about pushing Chrome out all the time automatically. So I want to filter Chrome out of this list. What you can do there is you can actually add a title filter search. So you hit that title and click on this. In here, you can make a list of things to either include or exclude. If I go ahead and do this and minus Chrome, and this is a wildcard search, and adding the minus at the beginning says exclude. So imagine like a star on each side of this search term. So minus Chrome and add and OK. And now if I hit the preview, we'll see that Chrome is not there. You can also do it the other way around. Say I only wanted to do Chrome, I can actually just remove the minus and hit add and just do Chrome. And then you'll see here, the only thing included is Chrome. But for this demo, I want to do all of them. So I'm going to remove that title filter. And you can see here, there's a ton more options that you can choose. And we'll go next, evaluation schedule. So this schedule is when should the ADR run? By default, it chooses to run after any software update point synchronization, but for me, I think that would be too fast. So PatchMy PC does a sync daily at 7 p.m. by default, and PatchMy PC can trigger the software update point sync. So if I chose this one, it would happen every day at 7 p.m. Additionally, Config Manager usually has its own. This environment does not have a software update point sync schedule set, but usually Config Manager will have its own time period where it will run its own software update point sync. So you could have this thing running like twice a day if you had after every software update point sync. What I'm going to choose instead is run the rule in a schedule. And I'll hit customize here. The default says every 7 days, but you see here there's a ton of options. You can choose none, which would only run it once. I don't see the point of that. You can choose monthly, and there's a ton of cool options for monthly. You can do like the second Tuesday. You can do the day after the second Tuesday, which is different than the second Wednesday. So there's a ton of options here that you can use. You can choose the last day of the month. You can choose a certain specific day of the month, and you can say like every other month even. I was going to run this weekly, and let's do it on every Tuesday. One important thing to note is that your deployment start time is basically going to be a few minutes after the ADR runs. So the ADR runs, then it creates your deployment immediately after. So this time here is very important because it's going to determine when things actually start. So let's choose like 6 p.m. instead of like 9 a.m. And so now when your ADR runs at 6 p.m., it'll run, create the SUG, and then deploy it out. Every 1 week, Tuesday, at 6 p.m. and then we'll hit next. So this is next up is our deployment schedule. This is for our pilot group. And for our pilot group, I want things to happen as soon as possible. So pilot group gets everything immediately. I'll go a bit more into this when I get into the next phase, which is like our production group deployment. Next, user experience. Again, we went through this window before. I'm going to do the defaults. One thing that is different on the software updates deployment than like the application deployment is you do have this device restart behavior window. So this is whether or not you want just to press this restart. I've seen a lot of people just default to checking this box and suppressing the reboot on servers. That seems to be the use case, especially if they're just deploying to workstation devices. And this is kind of like a fail safe. Like if somehow a server got into my workstation deployment group, I still don't want them to reboot. Everything else is the same thing that I've gone over earlier, except you do have this option now of software updates deploy reevaluation behavior upon restart. So if any of the updates needed a restart, you can check this box and it'll run its software deployment reeval right after that. Next, alerts. We're going to skip that. Deployment package. This is where you choose the deployment package. I already have a deployment package created that has all my Patch My PC updates. For third-party updates, I recommend just having one deployment package. Don't have a deployment package for each app. You can have a single one, and it won't get too large usually with third-party updates. The one time that you may want to have two deployment packages for third-party updates is if you have a CMG and you want to distribute different apps to the CMG or different updates to the CMG than you do for your internal devices. Otherwise, you should probably just have one. And we'll hit next. Download location. This is almost always download software updates from the internet. There's a few situations where you download from the network. I'm not going to go over those now, but they have to do with proxies. We'll hit next again. Language selection. You don't usually have to mess with this. And download settings. Again, you'll probably know this better than me. What I've seen most people do is download software from a distribution point and install, download software from the distribution point. These have to do with boundary groups and whether or not devices can get their content from either the boundary group they're assigned to or a neighbor boundary group. These bottom ones, again, we have metered internet connection. We also have, if software updates are not available on distribution points and any related boundary group, download from Microsoft Update. For third-party patches, this checkbox does nothing. Microsoft is not hosting your updates in their Microsoft Cloud service. So don't worry about this checkbox for third-party updates. For Windows updates, you might want that one. And finally, there's our summary. Next. So that was our deployment that was our ADR. Our ADR is now created, and we did create one deployment with that ADR to our pilot group. I'm going to really quickly go over deploying to a production group now. So if I do this, if I right click on the ADR, you can say add deployment. This is how you can create multiple deployments. One thing I want to point out for this second deployment, this will be our production deployment. You can choose to disable the deployment by default. So that means Config Manager will create the deployment, but it won't be active, and you have to go manually turn it on. So if you really want to make sure that this deployment doesn't go out until you've tested everything, you can default it to disabled, and then after the deployment happens, you go in and right click and say turn on. We'll again choose our collection, production, and hit next. Tab deployment requirement, next. Okay, so now we're going to talk a bit about when this deployment will be available. So for the pilot group, we did everything immediately. For this one, we're going to give it a few days. So we made our pilot group available immediately. For our production group, we'll give it 5 days to test, and we'll make it available after 5 days. Now, after that, we want a deadline, and we want a deadline before 7 days. And just note that this deadline date is additive with this software available time. So if I did 5 and 7, this would actually happen after 12 days. We don't want that. We want it after 6 days. So we're just going to add one additional day to this. So what this would do is 5 days after the ADR ran, this update would become available and it can start downloading on endpoints. And then the day after, it'll deadline and it'll start installing on endpoints. And we'll hit next. And I like to display in Software Center and show notifications for restarts. I'm going to leave everything else default, and we'll hit next. and next. And again, the download settings, and next, and we're done. That's it. And now you'll see that we do have 2 deployments, one for 1 day, one for 7 days. I'm gonna actually kick this off and show you what that looks like. So we have 1 day, 7 days. You can see that one of them is enabled, the other one is not. And if we go to software update groups, there's our software update group that it just created. So there's the software update group. You see here, it's deployed to 2 collections. If we hit deployment, we have the 2 groups. We have one enabled, one not. You see deployed on, and then let me actually add the deadline time too. So you can see the deadline happening. And then once you're happy with your pilot collection, you can actually right click here and hit enable for your production collection, and then that deployment will be active. And that's it for the software updates. I want to talk about the Config Manager apps real quick. So we did deploy Config Manager app, but I did want to talk about those options in Patch My PC for the app creation. So in Patch My PC under options, we've got, these are the options I was discussing earlier. We've got the update existing application metadata deployment type. This means it will update in place. The other option that I mentioned earlier, create a new application without modifying previous applications. This will create a new application every single time in Patch My PC or in Config Manager. You also do get the option to delay the in-place upgrade by a certain number of days. What this does is, because you're updating the application in place, you might want your updates to actually do the updating. If you have a required deployment on a Config Manager app and we update the app in place, it's gonna start upgrading applications to whatever devices it's deployed required to immediately. So this delay allows you to have some time to push your Config Manager updates out and have those do the actual updating instead of your applications. And then again, the retain option, I like to turn this on and set it to 1 or 2, just so you always have backups. I think that's all I have to talk about in terms of Config Manager apps and updates. I'm sure there were questions. Do we have any questions, moderators, that you want to bubble up? And if not, there's plenty of time for Q&A at the end too. Awesome. I'm going to hand it over to Kyle then, and he'll talk about Microsoft Intune.
All right, so I'm going to let Andrew come up from Air and talk about Microsoft Intune today, or was that Endpoint Manager? Who really knows anymore? But much like Configuration Manager, Intunes have some of those same high-level concepts when you're assigning or deploying apps from Intune, such as the who. So that would be who's receiving the assignments, whether that's specific groups, all users, or all devices in your environment. The what being the application that should be assigned. The where, however, you don't really have to worry about it. Whereas in Configuration Manager, you're managing that distribution of that content to distribution points so those endpoints can access it. When you're creating applications in Intune, it's just stored in the cloud. You don't have to worry about the where. The when is when that application should be available, and a deadline if you're setting one of those. Then the how is how that application should be assigned. Basically the intent, whether it's required, available, or uninstall. Now, a recent change with Intune, I believe this past February, is prior to that change, you could only assign apps as available to groups of users. With the recent change, though, you can also assign apps to groups of devices as long as those devices have a primary user assigned in the portal. Moving on, we're going to talk about some of the different types of applications in Intune. We're not going to talk about all the types. That might be several webinars in and of itself. But we're going to talk about the 2 most popular types in Intune if you're just kind of starting out fresh, creating apps from scratch. The one thing to note is with Intune, there is no concept of update content or update apps, whereas Configuration Manager, you have apps and packages, and then software updates to update existing installs of applications. In Intune, it's all applications. The 2 main types are line of business apps or LOB apps and Win32 apps. Line of business apps are limited to particular types of installer files, such as MSI, MSIX, and so on. They're generally the easiest to create. So when we see users starting out fresh with Intune and creating applications from scratch, it might select line of business apps in general to start, because a lot of the GUI and the UI walks you through a lot of the process automatically, and it also includes those detection methods that are built into those installers. So you don't have to really worry about that with those. However, Win32 apps, on the other hand, are a lot more verbose and more flexible, but they can be a bit more complex. The easiest way to think about Intune or Win32 apps are kind of like the applications you're setting up or creating in Configuration Manager. One important note here is that if they're called Win32 apps, that does not mean they're 32-bit apps. They can be 64-bit or 32-bit. One thing that's different when you're actually creating Win32 applications and uploading that content into your tenant is all the content's compressed in something that's called an Intune Win file. You can kind of think of it like a compressed zip file for the content. We're not going to dive into how to do that today when creating base applications. We've got a link in the webinar slides here that goes out to the Microsoft Win32 content prep tool. So when you're getting starting with creating Win32 applications, we just recommend you browse out to that link and kind of work through the utility. It's pretty straightforward and easy to use. But again, it's something that you need to do if you're creating Win32 applications manually. One important thing to note before we move on is that a general best practice or recommendation is to not mix line of business apps and Win32 application apps, assignments, or deployments in your environment. The reasoning behind that is they can cause conflicts. Both line of business apps and Win32 apps use the trusted installer service on the endpoint. However, Win32 apps are exclusive to the Intune management extension and work through that piece. So what can happen is if you have line of business apps installing and a Win32 application is assigned or tries to install at the same time, they can conflict and one can fail or it can lock up and just sit there and do nothing. So generally the word is from Microsoft that if you're using Win32 applications at all, the best practice is to exclusively use Win32 applications. And next, we're going to talk about conflicts between assignment intents. So essentially the types of deployments or assignments that you're creating in Intune for those applications. So when you're assigning applications to groups, you cannot target the same group with different intents. So essentially, if you have group A and you're assigning an app as required to that group, you also can't assign the same app as an uninstall to that group. Unfortunately, though, you can have devices and users that exist in multiple groups and have different assignments for those apps with different intents to those separate groups. So if you have group A and group B, group A is getting a required assignment for an app, group B is getting an uninstall for that app. You may have device one in both of those groups, and that's when conflicts can occur. Now, Microsoft has a big, scary chart that's over 20 different scenarios of how those conflicts kind of work themselves out. So if you're seeing weird behavior with the assignment or installed apps in your environment, we kind of recommend just bookmarking that chart, be cognizant of it when you're doing testing and assignments of applications. You could probably do another webinar on diving into all those different conflicts and seeing how those resolve themselves. But again, the links in the PowerPoint slides here today, I would definitely recommend going and checking that out. Next here, we're going to talk about how PatchMyPC has developed something that can handle or create update content for applications. Again, natively in Intune, there's no such thing as updates, there's just apps. So with the PatchMyPC publisher, you can actually create application update content. The way that update content works, kind of at a high level, is that it runs a pre-requirement script that's actually validating whether or not the endpoint that's assigned to is applicable for that update content. So if you're assigning out an update for Google Chrome, for example, that pre-requirement script is going to see, is Google Chrome installed? And is it below the version you're assigning out? If both those conditions are met, it will run the update content and get that software installed to the version you have assigned out. As far as managing assignments, what we're going to look at today is how you can manage assignments within the PatchMyPC publisher itself. It can be easier when using the PatchMyPC publisher to kind of visualize or see, stagger out deployments over groups, so like a ring deployment methodology. If you're doing those assignments over a period of time to different groups, so we'll take a look at that. Dynamic assignments. So again, kind of circling back to the idea that there is no update content natively in Intune, so therefore there's no such thing as ADRs in Intune. To kind of tackle that scenario, we've developed something called Managed Dynamic Assignments that will allow you to create a rule or a filter similar to how you would with ADRs. If that criteria is met for that rule, it can automatically assign out software on a different schedule or software updates on a different schedule that will kind of work around your already existing assignments, so to speak. So we'll kind of cover that and kind of walk through that as well. And then last but not least, we'll show off the Intune Application Manager. It's another utility we have in the PatchMyPC Publisher. With that, I'll give you kind of a single pane glass view of all the applications in your tenant. You'll be able to take action on those items in bulk or individually. So it could be a huge time saver if you're just trying to clean up applications in your tenant, or if you want to assign multiple applications or delete assignments off multiple applications. We'll take a look at that as well. And with that, I'm going to kick out to my desktop and show some of this off here. Just so for reference here, this is the PatchMyPC Publisher. So if those of you out there on the call have never seen it before, here it is. Again, we're just going to live in this Intune Updates tab here today. Anything you enable from a product perspective in this catalog list will enable the update content for those applications. We've already got some applications enabled and synced up to our tenant here. It's really quick. I'm going to browse out and just show that update content. So before the presentation today, already built up these update content. You can see it in our tenant here. All of the update content is prefaced with this update for and the name of the application, kind of separate them from the other Win32 applications you can build up with the publisher. If we jump back to the publisher here, let's kind of talk about how you can manage those assignments and set up like a staggered rollout of update content to different groups in your environment. So I'm going to right click on this all products level here at the top and use this manage assignments button. This will do is bring up another pane here. And if I click add assignments, you'll notice that this will populate all the groups in your Azure Active Directory tenant, and you can select multiple groups here. And if we do that, we can actually set the deployment or the assignment settings for those various groups. So if we want to stagger out all of our update content to 3 groups in this example over a period of time, we can set that availability here. So let's do like 1 day at this device time. The one thing to note here, this publishing date is not the date that the vendor published that software. It's actually the date that that software update content got synced into your environment from the PatchMyPC Publisher. So we'll set this first group to 1 day later. We can set this next group to 3 days later. Same time looks good. And this last group, we'll just stick with the naming convention we have here and set it to 7 days later. Now, one important thing to note here as well, since we are assigning this update content out as required, if you are setting availability time, it's important not to set deadlines. And what that means, if you stagger out the deadline with required update content, you could get in a scenario where, since all of these are processed in a sequence with that Intune management extension, where that content will start downloading at the availability date, but won't actually execute until the deadline is set. For here, we had to set the ASAP. So after that availability, it's going to start that deadline right away. But if you were to set this to, let's just say 7 days later, it would just sit there and download in that state for 7 days before executing, and that would lock up and block any of those subsequent updates from occurring as well. The other really important thing to set here is restart grace periods. We'll cover this a bit later and when we talk about kind of reboots, but when you're signing out required assignments for application updates, you always want to enable a restart grace period for the scenarios where if you don't enable this, the software or Intune might just choose to reboot that device. So if you have a restart grace period enabled here in these assignments, at the very least, you can control some of the timing and notifications around that for your end users. So we've got all those set. That looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and click OK here to save those settings. So great. With that, all of our enabled software update content is going out or automatically being assigned to those groups over a period of time. But let's say Chrome releases 2 0-day vulnerabilities within a week. We all know that wouldn't happen in real life, but to handle that scenario, you can use the Manage Dynamic Assignments feature. And just like ADRs, this is where you can define a rule set to kind of supersede your already existing assignments. So let's call this Chrome 0-day just for fun. I can type. There we go. Description, Chrome updates. Looks good. We'll move on here. We'll basically say, yeah, it has a CVE. Severity, we'll mark this as critical. So to basically capture any critical updates. And then the title, we just want to grab anything that has Chrome in the title. And then with this rule set, once this is validated, it will assign it out to the groups you specify within this wizard. So what you could do here is simply add in an all available or required assignment to all devices. This means whenever there's a Chrome update that comes out that has a CVE that is critical in nature, it will automatically assign it out as required, in this case to all devices, right away. Can be really fast, so it kind of depends on your environment and how you're deploying updates and applications. But this would supersede those deployment rings we set up earlier, so those Chrome updates would go out quicker. They wouldn't wait for that 1 day or 3 day or 7 day delay to get out to the devices in those groups. All right, and last but not least, I'm gonna click OK on all this fun stuff. We can open up the application manager wizard here, just that little cloud icon. This will show you in real time all the applications that are currently in your tenant. So these are the applications or the update content we recreated before the presentation today. And you can take action on these in bulk. So if you want to delete this application in particular, right click, delete application, it immediately gets kicked out of the tenant. So if we go back in here and refresh, that application is gone. It's a really handy way if you're maybe transitioning into Patch My PC, you've got a lot of already existing applications in your tenant. This can be a really easy way to clean up those applications as well as you transition over to the automated update content. You can also multi-select these and do things such as, right-click and assign them, or view in the endpoint portal. So if we click that link, it'll actually take you out to the application. This might be a little bit weird in the demo environment. Yeah, real quick. Try that again. Use this account. There we go. So easy way to kick out to the portal and get to the actual content or view that content in the Intune portal. Real quick, while we're here, we can kind of show you where that pre-requirement script lives. It's in here in this requirement section. So again, basically looking for whether or not that software is installed, and if it's below this version. If so, it'll go ahead and try to run that update content. And with that, I think we're going to jump back into the PowerPoint and kick it back to Andrew to talk about some deployment strategies or best practices. Rather, I'm going to have to just slide through these really quick. All right. I'll just leave it up on my screen and
Awesome.
Andrew can kind of talk about this next section here.
Yep. So for people like to ask a lot about best practices. There are no best practices. There are things that you should probably do, but we get asked a lot about like, how often should I sync? When should I do my deployments? How long should they last? We get lots of questions like that. And at the end of the day, for update deployments and app deployments, that decision is it's a business decision. It's not a technical decision. The technical answer is always deploy everything all the time immediately. When that's not how the world works, and there's a lot of complex decisions that have to be made in order to have a successful deployment strategy. So what I can say is things that we recommend you do. One is to utilize deployment rings. I think we both showed how to create deployment rings in both Config Manager and Intune. Test these apps and updates on your devices before they go out to a large group. That will minimize headaches. When making apps, it's best to have an install and uninstall provided. If you need to do a quick rollback, having that uninstall available and ready to go can be very helpful. Next, deployment schedules should be predictable. If your users know when updates are going to happen, I've found that a lot of times they'll help you with patching. They will make sure their devices are on during the patching schedule, but they need to know when that is, and it needs to be predictable. You can also use a predictable patch schedule to make sure that you only have like one reboot instead of 5. If you install everything around the same time, you can make sure those reboots all get bundled up at the same time, and you only end up having one. And finally, I want to just lead off again. This is a business decision, a lot more than it is a technical decision. And every deployment carries risk. Updating or having outdated apps also carries risk. So you definitely need to balance the risks. I'm not saying don't deploy things as soon as you can, but you need to weigh the impact on your business. I've found that if
mistakes in deployments can actually make make the business wary of doing future deployments. So making sure that you weigh those risks and try to reduce issues by testing as much as possible is going to make the process much smoother. And once you build a level of trust, you can usually speed things up if you want. Yeah, and that's the general gist of it.
All right, let's talk about reboots. I'm sure half the webinar just dove out of here because they're afraid of reboots, but in general, reboots are good. There is software that can update itself and doesn't require a reboot, but if there are software updates that require reboots and you're suppressing them, that software is not actually installed until that reboot occurs. If you're suppressing a lot of reboots, that can also kind of lead to other installs failing. Unlimited number of scenarios we can kind of cover there as far as why reboots are good now. Reboot as much as you can. Again, reboots can kind of be scary. It kind of depends on the environment that you're managing. But as long as you have control over those reboots and you're communicating and know that they're coming, generally people aren't too upset with their device rebooting nowadays. So just some high-level information. Configuration Manager and Intune can handle those reboots. The applications and updates are supposed to pass exit codes back to those management systems, alerting them that a reboot is required, and then you can kind of control what occurs through those management agents when those exit codes are received. So basically on the policies you have set, whether it's in the Configuration Manager client or on the Intune side for defining those reboot grace periods, that's when you can control when those reboots should occur. Of course, some apps may want to reboot and may not pass a reboot code whatsoever, or they may have some other prerequisite install that requires a reboot as well. So again, along with everything we've said today, just test. Always test your software update deployments. Try to catch those unattended reboots. If you see those occurring in testing, plan for a way to communicate that or to handle that through some other scripting to control when those reboots occur. Just don't suppress them and hope the user or the device decides to reboot itself at some point. Last item here is kind of app assignments. Again, we mentioned this when we were setting up those assignments to those groups in the Patch My PC publisher, but always set a restart grace period. If no restart grace period is set on that assignment, Intune may decide to reboot like whenever the heck it chooses to do so. And that's usually at the most inopportune time for your end users. So I think with that, we're just gonna jump into the Q&A and answer questions from the crowd.
And I think our moderators have done a pretty decent job of answering questions. I do have one situation that I did want to show if we had enough time, and it looks like we do have enough time. I wanted to show, Kyle, you showed like, oh, what if there's a 0-day for Chrome? I want to show that in Config Manager. So I'm going to steal the share. And hopefully everyone can still see that.
I mean, there's never any 0 days for Chrome, so this is hypothetical.
And then, yes, and then if we don't have any Q&As after this, we do have a giveaway. Awesome. Okay, so I think I gave it enough time to show the screen. I'm hoping the share actually is happening. But say we wanted, anytime there was a 0-day for Chrome, we wanted to make sure it went out. So to do that, let's make another ADR, and we're going to call this Google Chrome 0-day. And for our collection, we're just gonna yeet this to everyone. And we'll add to an existing software update group for this one, and we'll hit next. It's going to be a required deployment. We want vendor is Patch My PC. We want superseded is no, same base that we made earlier, and we want a title filter for Google Chrome. And we're going to add this. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to do, let's do update classification. I think that's it. Yes, critical updates. I think you can also do severity.
instead. Yeah, and so actually let's do critical severity and take off the update classification. All right, so now if the severity is critical, and I'm not even sure this will pull the current Google Chrome because that wasn't a 0-day, but severity critical, superseding no, Google Chrome. You know what? I wonder if we do severity. Let's do critical and important. You may just want critical in this situation. There it is. Okay, cool. Yeah, but this one did have security fixes, so we'll do that. And we'll hit next. And we're going to run this after every software update point synchronization. So anytime a software update point sync runs, we're going to run this ADR. And if there's a new update that needs to be added, it'll totally add it. And we'll hit next. And we're going to want this thing to go as quickly as possible. Maybe we'll give it like a few hours to deadline. We'll give it like 3 hours to deadline, but we'll make it available as soon as possible so if people want to install it, and then we'll deadline it after 3 hours. And this one also, we talked a little bit about maintenance windows, but if these devices are not in a maintenance window, say we still want this update to install. To do that, we'll check this box here. So even if we're not in a maintenance window, this update will install once the deadline hits. And then we're still gonna suppress reboots on servers. You don't have Chrome on your server, right? Cool.
Never.
And that's really it. So those are the big changes there. So if you want to do separate rules, that's when you will have a separate ADR. If you just want to do separate deployments, you only need one ADR. But if you want separate rules for certain things, you can make more ADRs. There's nothing stopping you. So this one's for Google Chrome 0-day. Now, what I have seen a lot of people do that I don't recommend is I've seen people make an ADR, one for each like specific third-party update. I don't recommend that. There's no real point in having an ADR run for each specific update, and there's no point in having like a separate deployment package for each separate update. It's just a lot more mess to clean up in the future. If you can have one ADR that does the Patch My PC ones. If you only want to include specific updates, just choose them with the title filter. But if you do want something to go out like more frequently or less frequently, make a separate ADR for that. I think we still have a few minutes for questions. This goes until what, 9:30 or 30 minutes after the hour, depending on your time zone. So yeah, do we have any questions from our moderators that have bubbled up that you think we should answer out loud?
Only one, because I just hit publish and I can't find it to reply to it.
Okay.
The Jabber Direct. So someone said that they have Jabber Direct on their devices and they're kicking out the update, but they see UAC. Did you want to tackle that?
That sounds like, to me, my first thought when I hear that is it's an MSI and it installed in advertisement mode. And so the first time the user opens it, it's trying to actually finish the install. If you've ever installed an MSI and then double click the icon and it pops up like the MSI install box, that means it was installed in advertisement mode. I've seen it happen for like weird reasons. Usually like doing like a slash install all users, or I think there's a MSI property that you can add so that you like do not install advertisement shortcuts.
I think generally software in our catalog can be updated without giving the user a UAC prompt. But if you are deploying a package made by Patch My PC and you are seeing UAC prompts when the update or app tries to install, reach out to us and support. And yeah, because we would want to know about that. Yeah, that's not the normal behavior.
We've had to add like command line options when they've changed the MSI or broken it in some way to like not do advertised shortcuts. I've seen it with VLC before. So yeah, reach out to us and we'll try to fix that because we definitely don't want that. We've actually kept products out of our catalog because they do that. I'm thinking like Postman has been a popular request, and Postman prompts for UAC when you install it, and it's a user-based app. And we've kept it out because of that, because that's not a really valid way to push software out to people if it requires a UAC prompt. Are we ready to do a giveaway, or do we have more questions? I'm gonna roll through the questions real quick.
There's loads of questions. Yeah.
All right.
Along with questions, if anyone in the crowd has ideas or wants to see something in a future webinar, drop those in those as well. You probably have to enter it as a question, but we'll probably also do more advanced webinars on both of these topics, because we could probably do a webinar on advanced Figman deployment strategies and advanced Intune deployment strategies. This is kind of just top level content today.
I do see one comment on real world scenario for the deployment I just made. So this is a Chrome 0-day. And if you have your security team breathing down your neck, I gave it a 3-hour deadline. That was just so that some devices can download the stuff before other devices. So in a real world scenario, you might just do it as soon as possible, I set the deadline for 3 hours because it's 10 a.m. So it'll start installing at 3 p.m. Or I guess it'll start installing at 1 p.m. But for a lot of those 0-day scenarios, you just want it out as soon as possible. You could totally give it a whole day. And it really just depends on your situation.
I've got another one, and this is actually quite a common discussion, I find, but I think you'll do a good job answering this, obviously, is it's talking about reboots. So there's kind of like two questions. So if you hide Software Center, here is like the user experience. If you hide updates from the Software Center and suppress reboots, will the computer reboot anyway?
I don't believe so. I think if you hide from Software Center and suppress reboots, it's not going to reboot. It's gonna say a reboot's needed though, like in the registry and stuff. It's gonna mark that reboot as being needed, but it's not going to reboot it twice.
I think I actually just added that suppressed bit onto it. I was kind of like scrolling while trying to find it after publishing the question. But the question is, if you hide Software Center and all restriction, will the computer reboot anyway? So I think that kind of depends then on the client settings, right? If you don't have the suppress checkbox set, whether a reboot is then going to happen or not, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a really good one here, actually, from Ron. Into deployment strategy question. I'm going to publish this one so it's there. Into deployment strategy question around how to handle apps that need both an available and required assignment. A common scenario at my company, application X, make an available assignment that users can install from company portal. But we also need to make a required assignment that upgrades the older versions of application X. So we wind up creating two applications, one for the available assignment, then one for the required assignment. We're creating a second Intune application called something like application X upgrade only, and using a PowerShell script as a requirement to do some checking if the app is installed. Does this sound like a reasonable approach? Yes, that is totally a reasonable approach. That is exactly what our Intune apps and Intune updates do. So our Intune apps are designed to be deployed as available, and then our Intune updates have that requirement rule that that looks to see if the older version of software is installed and installs the update. So yes, Ron, that is exactly a smart way to go about it. If you want to make something available but still update it with required deployments, you can add that requirement rule, have that requirement rule look for the older version and upgrade it.
Saw something in here about kind of showing off conflicting processes, maybe really quick. That's a way to also kind of notify end users too. You can enable that on pretty much any product. You could do it on Chrome or Edge or any of that fun stuff, but another way to present some notifications to your end users.
Yeah, so in Patch My PC, this should be available under any of the tabs. Right-click the product, hit Manage Conflicting Processes. You have a few options here: auto close, skip, notify. Auto close closes without any notification. It just closes the apps. Skip will skip the installation if any of the apps are open, and then notify will actually pop up a notification to the user. You can hit this manage process list and see the apps that would trigger this feature. And then you can go into manage default settings and see actually how it will appear. You can customize it with an organization name, Patch My PC, and hit preview, and it'll show you what it looks like. You can also set a custom banner image if you have a logo. Let's do the dark one. and preview, and it'll update that as well. Localization, most people don't need to change this. I think we have 11 of the most popular languages in here, but if you do want to, you can customize things. So you can add a language and then make sure you fill out absolutely everything in here. And you can add custom languages as well. I'm gonna actually remove English as well, and it should just default it. So yeah, tons of options in here for manage conflicting processes. I'm looking through. Looking through the questions now, see if there's any other really good ones that I want to talk over that have to do with deployment. Oh, that's a good one. I assume you want a different deployment package for 0 days with a high priority distribution schedule. That's actually a good question. Because if you had a really big package, it would take longer to sync with the DPs. What do you guys think? And I'll
Sorry, say again.
Yeah, I'd assume you want a different deployment package for 0 days with a high priority distribution schedule. And that actually makes a lot of sense to me, especially if you have a lot of DPs in remote branches. You probably want to, yeah. So John, this one. Yeah.
If you're, I would say if you're like on like slow WAN links and distribution is a sensitive kind of process for your network, then yeah, maybe that makes sense.
Yeah, if you have a lot of DPs, if they're on slow WAN links, stuff like that, and it is really high priority to get the software distributed, that makes a lot of sense. Excellent. Two questions real quick.
So one question is about dependencies. Do we carry them forward? So the question word for word is, does the automatic app creation deployment tool for Intune, which I presume referring to our publisher, update application dependencies for other apps when new updates are rolled out?
So we do have, and the options, we have this update application dependencies from previously created applications when an updated application is created. I believe that is going to do what you want. So this is disabled by default. We had thoughts about, because you can't delete applications with dependencies. Once you turn this on, we'll be able to delete old applications that potentially are still being used if you still have like this delete option on, but feel free to turn that on and it should move any application dependencies that you put on a Patch My PC Intune app to the latest version. And then we just added this copy requirements rule as well. So if you add an additional requirements rule to a Patch My PC Intune app or update, we'll also copy those over.
Another good question is doing OS patching via WoofBeam and deploying third-party updates via Config Manager a supported scenario. I think we had a webinar on that a couple, not long ago, right?
I feel like Ben Whitmore would know more about that than me.
The answer is yes.
Ben, you're all flushed out. I see you come off mute. Don't know if you wanted to say anything.
Yeah, I'm off mute. Yeah, so for that particular scenario, you're in a co-managed scenario, then you move the Windows Update workload to Windows Update for Business. And effectively what that does, it enables a feature called dual scan, which is being deprecated for Windows 11, but it's essentially the same functionality. And that is when the WSUS agent on your client will stop scanning your WSUS instance for Microsoft updates, because that comes from the Windows Update service now, but it will still scan WSUS with third-party updates by default. So any third-party content you're deploying through WSUS is still valid, and the device will still scan for it, and so those deployments will still be valid as well. One of the considerations though is if you are in that scenario and you still are scanning WSUS for third-party content, is just consider how your devices will receive that content, because no doubt they're probably on the internet now. So do you have a VPN for line of sight to your management point and software update point, or are you going to use a CMG for them to get that content? But it is a valid design, yeah.
So that you discussed that, right, in your webinar, I think, right, not long ago, that topic, that scenario.
Yeah, maybe if somebody's got the link,
yeah,
on as well, just post in the chat.
Yeah,
we did go into some detail on that scenario.
Yeah, maybe bring it up like our YouTube channel on screen real quick, Andrew. Pretty sure that video is published now from that webinar, and Ben goes kind of like 10 miles deep on all things code management.
What was it again? Which? Because we have
code management webinar. 1 second.
Here we go. This one?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yep.
That's the sign up page there.
Because scroll down.
It links. Yeah.
Scroll down on that.
We have a copy here, and I think we have. Do we have a link to the actual video?
Yep. Right there.
Oh yeah, here we go. Here's all the videos too.
Oh wow, nice.
And like, I'll just add to that as well, because I have seen some questions to this point. So if you're in that scenario where you are migrating workloads to Intune, one of the other scenarios you may come across is, well, if I'm deploying third-party content from Config Manager, and with Patch My PC, I've now got the option to deploy it from Intune, which one should I do? Because your devices may still be targeted with that deployment from Config Man for the update. If you then start deploying the updates from Intune, one of the agents will install the update, so it's not a breaking scenario. The only thing to bear in mind is, what do your compliance reports look like? Because if the application didn't install from Config Manager and it came from Intune, where are you going to look for your source of truth for reporting on that data? So it is, when you move the client apps workload to Intune, you can push updates down from Intune, and you can still have them deployed from Config Manager, but that's maybe a scenario that isn't optimal. Like, as you move workloads to Intune, maybe consider stop targeting the devices in the collections from Config Manager. We also there was another one as well. That's probably worth looking at, the Cloud Management Gateway. Like, if you're in that scenario and you're moving updates to the cloud, or you're moving your clients to be more internet based, that's another really good one. There was a really good question, Andrew, if you want to take this one, or Kyle. If somebody asked if I make a change to a customization within the publisher to a specific application, how do I get that changed out quickly to Intune?
I actually just answered that one. So okay. For Intune apps in Patch My PC, when we upload the Intune Win, everything is in that Intune Win file. So making a change to like a right-click option won't happen just on a sync. You'll also want to right-click and republish that app during the next sync. So make your change, like I just added delete desktop shortcut, and then hit republish, and yes, and then go to sync schedule and run a sync. I think we can make this a bit smarter. I'll work with the devs and see if we can make it so that if you do make a change, maybe we'll prompt you and say, hey, do you want to make this change happen on the next sync? Otherwise, it'll happen the next time a new version is released. And that's just because we can't track the changes that are happening in the Intune Win file, because we'd have to grab the Intune Win file, download it, extract it, and then process it. So doing a republish will force us to push up a new Intune Win package instead with all the changes. But I think we should have like a prompt there if you make a change. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. That's it for the webinar. I hope you all enjoyed. I definitely plan on doing like an advanced
deployment webinar where we go a bit deeper into like more deployment strategies, like most people want to do monthly or every other month, and we're tackling 0 days a bit more, stuff like that. So please feel free to join us for our next webinar and have a great rest of your day.